I'm just good. We'll get along great.
Yeah, I'm just giving you and the
Hi,
wine
fam.
my
We are
ADD.
we got so engrossed in behind the scenes conversation. We forgot that we were supposed to go live. So hey fam, welcome to our live tasting with our winemaker, Rachel Loew Lipman. Welcome, Rachel.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
We are excited to be here. Yeah, we are. I'm sorry. I'm just so thrown off.
We were really engrossed in good conversation.
We were talking about sparkling red wine. So Rachel, please tell everybody where you're from.
Yeah. So thank you. I'm really excited to be connecting with all of you. And so I'm Rachel Loew Lipman. I'm the granddaughter and winemaker for my family's winery, Loew Vineyards, which is located in Mount Airy, Maryland. We're the fourth oldest existing winery in the state of Maryland. And although our winery started in Maryland in 1982, the family history, the legacy actually goes back to the mid-1800s in producing honey wines or mead or miód pitný in the mid-1800s in Lviv, Poland, which we all now know as Lviv, Ukraine. And we have a pretty complicated history when it comes to that. So we actually have one of the longest tenures of mead production in the world. And we're now, and actually the oldest honey winery production in the United States and one of the oldest wineries in Maryland. So we've been around the block a little bit, even though I'm quite young for a winemaker. But it's been a really, really unique history that we've had and legacy that we've been able to share in all of our wines. And meads are named specifically, unless like it's single varietal, are all named after the family history or people, actually.
So you just recently had a few big honors where your wine's placed in Texom. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes. How'd you feel when you heard about it?
So I was pretty shocked, honestly. So this Texom is an international competition that is one of the hardest competitions that's held in the United States for wines it's an international, and they usually have over 2,000, 3,000 entries a year. And I just always, the wineries that I knew that had entered into that competition, like from Bulgaria, from all these different regions of the world, like I thought that when they got high marks, they made it in many aspects. And so we entered into that competition. In 2022 was our first time entering, and then 2023 is when we entered. Well, actually 2024, so a couple months ago, so when we entered. And our Malbec got a judge's selection, so which is higher than a gold, and it got a best in show for Malbec. So it beat out top producers of Argentinian Malbec, which like it's pretty shocking and pretty amazing.
That's saying a lot. That's saying huge.
Yeah, I mean, $125 bottles of Malbec from Argentina, like, were below on the list compared to ours. And like, it's just so funny how life works. This variety it's a variety that I like to work with. I like to make red wines with it. I like to make rosé with it. I like to put it in blends. And I have a little love-hate relationship with that variety in general. But I think the reason why ours did so well was because it's not drinking like a big, bold Napa Cab. It drinks a little bit more like the way that the variety grows in Maryland, or like really in general, has very thin skins. So it's more French in style, which is kind of where the European aspect of where my family history kind of comes into play. But yeah, I actually thought about taking it out of the program up until I found out about the award as a single varietal. And obviously I can't do that. So, and it wasn't anything against the Malbec. It was honestly just, I was trying to streamline the program a little bit better and figure out like why, how I can make wines and not have to make 17 or 18 out of 1,400 square feet of space in the winery. So yeah, it seems like it seems like I kind of failed at that. And obviously the wine did not fail, but I failed at condensing the program. So yeah, it's been pretty amazing. It's a really nice wine.
That is amazing. I think that actually says a lot, not only about you and as a winemaker, Loew in general, but what you have done to put Maryland on the map with a particular varietal, because, you know, old school in the wine industry, and as a somm, it's classic wines, classic regions, classic characteristics give you what you're looking for when you try something, you taste something, you know what should come out of that area. And Maryland, I think, has maybe not so much struggle, but maybe is a little bit kind of behind the times on helping other people understand what awesome juice can come from this area. And I think that your wine and you have really helped to do that. So it's important because your Malbec is expressing itself in its own characteristic and style, but to a potential that really identifies it with the area.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's a big. It's really important to be authentic when you're making wines, and the way that I make wines, I learned about making wine learned how to make wine from my grandfather primarily. I mean, he was, Central Eastern European. I mean, I worked with him every day for over a decade. And then, I have a lot of my training separately from my grandfather is really in Europe, and most of the travel I've done is in Europe, and the connections I have are with European winemakers. And I think that understanding where the variety comes from really helps with that aspect. And I think the other thing too is that we're making wines in the way that and I mean this in like the best way possible. I don't necessarily think of the consumer when I'm making wines. I think about the way that I can work with that variety in such a beautiful way that will show its best expression, not because like people love Argentinian Malbec, because I can never make an Argentinian Malbec in Maryland because it's just not possible. Right. Like the skins are so thin, the acids are different, the sugars are different. I mean, it's just a totally different climate. And I think to put makeup on a variety that can't handle it makes no sense to me personally. So
I'm so glad you said that, because recently we were at a festival and we were pouring a Virginia wine, which was is a very well made Virginia wine. And there were people who were from the West Coast, and they were like, it's so thin, like, as like something was wrong with it. And so I had to explain to them, and it was a Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, Petit Verdot, and I forget, there was something else, blend, right? So, typically those are like punch you in your face, really huge grapes. But when you take our area into consideration, it's just a different style of making wine. So I'm glad that you said that. And I think people are becoming aware of regionality and have an appreciation for regionality, but it's still, I think this area is still very new to people, and so they're not familiar with the style of winemaking in this area.
Yeah, I think a lot of times it depends on the winemaker, and it depends on the area that it's grown. I mean, like there's that dual influence in many ways. I think that when people start to learn more about the varieties themselves and start to learn about like is it thick skinned, thin skinned, like what the tannic structure is like variety characteristic for it technically, then I think that also helps. And I think the other thing that's really difficult for the consumer in general is that by regulation, we have, in order for it to be considered a single varietal of anything, it's 75% and above. And it's really interesting to see the difference in wines that are 75% versus 90% versus 100%. So like my personal rule of thumb for all of the wines that I produce, if it's going to be called a single varietal, it's 90% of that variety and above. Because I feel like I have wines that are 75% of a single varietal, like different clones, one variety. Like I have a red blend called Ancestry, and it's like 68% of one clone of Cabernet Franc. Then it's a 9% of another one, so 77%, whatever. If I can do math in my head correctly right now. But basically, it's interesting because that wine that's from the same vintage as my single varietal 100% Cabernet Franc, that's the 2021. They're like night and day. They're totally different wines. No, like if they're in a lineup, like it wouldn't be fair. It honestly would not be fair. And I think, I think that that's something that's really interesting because like for example, it goes to that whole Pinot Noir controversy of it should not stay in your mouth and it should be a lighter bodied red because it's been, I mean, like the tannic structure is not really always there, depending on where it's from and what clone. But like, I think that is really difficult a lot of times for consumers because there's within one variety, you can have massive amount of and just in terms of the wine that's produced. So it's a lot of it's the educational aspect too.
You've hit the nail on the head. I stress to people all the time when they're trying wines and they're like, I really don't like this Merlot, but I usually love Merlot, or, I don't like this Syrah, but I usually like Syrah. Obviously, it's not just where they get it from, but it's those blends. I'm like, 1 drop of Tabasco, make your sauce that much spicier. It's the same with wine blending. Just because it says it's a Merlot doesn't mean there isn't anything else in there. And I think clarity of labeling too is really important. So the rule of thumb is very good and not everybody follows that. So it's a little bit, deceiving or it's just, it really doesn't help the general population and consumers understand what they're getting, what they like. And they don't need to know all about the winemaking. They just need to know and understand what's in it, where it's from, and whether they like it or not.
Right. No, I 100% agree.
Yeah. So in our, you were one of our featured winemakers in our spring club, and we had your Gruner in the club. And but today you're drinking something red. What are you having today?
Yes.
So because we talked about the whole Polish candy situation.
Yes.
They pair so well with my Cabernet Franc. It's like insane. So my 2021 Cab Franc is like my go-to. My go-to red wine that I have that I open typically, and with my favorite candies.
Oh, I'm going to be getting those now that I know where they're from. I got them, like you said, in the gift basket, and I was like blown away. And I'm like, oh my God, but freezing them, that is such a great idea.
Yeah, it's life-changing. And it's so funny because I have told so many people about the kielbasa factory that I probably should have some sort of sponsorship at this point. Just kidding. But if they want to give me a discount on the
we should put it out there. I mean,
here it is.
Here it is.
Yeah, right. like Loew Vineyards Cab Franc and Patashki Maleshko chocolate frozen is like the perfect pairing. Also with that sparkling Nouveau. But anyway, yeah, it's I'm drinking the Cab Franc. I usually, I don't know, I was just kind of in the mood for something red, especially after planting a lot of vines that were a red variety today. So we're planting Blaufränkisch in our property. So everything that we do is based off of our family history or heritage, different parts of our history. And Blaufränkisch being a red variety that is native to Central Eastern Europe, and that's where my grandfather is from. So we thought it would be a good variety to be planting. Also, we do really well with it would do really well as a rosé and as a red wine. And at this point, because our rosé sells out so quickly, it seems like I need to keep upping that production, which I'll have to kind of figure it out at some point because it's not like my winery has gotten any larger, but my need for wines have gotten larger. So we'll see.
You had mentioned.
Go ahead, Christine. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say you had mentioned planting new vines. So how new are the Blaufränkisch, and when will we be seeing something from them?
So we just started planting them for the first time over the past couple of weeks. I'm on my final stretch of them because we have to do it by hand since it's an old vineyard and trellising's already there. Can't do the laser planting like some other vineyards can do. 3 to 5 years. So yeah.
The 7-year itch.
Yeah, so it's one of those things like the wine industry, it moves very fast and very slow.
Mhm.
So it moves very fast in the sense where once you have the wine, one would assume it moves, you sell it quickly. I mean, like we have had a rosé usually sells out within 4 to 6 months. And since I made 4 times more than I did last year, we're probably on track for that. But it takes many years to get a crop to be able to even get to that point. So, and then you have to wait a whole year for there to be another year of production. So it's a very fast and very slow industry, and it's hard to keep up with things. But I honestly, I stopped looking at the trends of wines. I stopped looking at what people think that they like and don't like, because like what goes up must come down, and vice versa. And it's really been very interesting that once we've actually have only started producing the wines that we really feel like will belong in our program and that we want to be producing, those are the wines that sell out the fastest.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a really unique thing to learn. Like I think the early days in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s, we were making wines for the consumer because they would basically tell us what they wanted. And then we would make a couple that we liked for ourselves, but beyond that. And I think at this point, the model has changed, and we've just been producing things that really just resonate with us. And therefore, I think the consumer is feeling that and understands that too.
I think like when we started, Albarino was fairly new in Maryland, and now everybody is producing it.
Yep.
And I think that's the same with Blaufränkisch, because only a few vineyards, like I remember Old Westminster was using that grape maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and now I'm starting to see it in more tasting rooms, which I think is great that the vineyard managers and winemakers are embracing what does well in this region.
Yeah, I think that's the most important aspect of grape growing is, I think in the 80s and 90s, there were a lot of trials and experimentation. And I think that's what, once there was that initial figuring out how to grow grapes, a lot of them were, those French American hybrids, the heritage varieties. Right. And I think that that's something that it gave the industry an ability of having a buffer for a learning curve to then figure out, okay, this is how then we grow vinifera. So the varieties that are like Cab Franc, Cab Sauv, like all those things. And then now we're starting to see this really interesting shift of like more obscure varieties that are not Cabernet Sauvignon. And like you're seeing Blaufränkisch, you're seeing Colombard or Pinot Blanc, or, any of those different varieties that aren't the mainstream. And then we're also seeing a resurgence of those heritage varieties as well, because I think that there's a big emphasis on sustainable agriculture. And so it's really been an interesting way of seeing the industry, because I feel like it's gotten so vast, and it's hard for there to be an identity.
Yes,
that is very, very true. I wonder, there's so many different varieties. I feel like Maryland still has, it's that rotation, like I was saying, the 7-year itch. So it's kind of like the standard of, trial and error. And for being such a small state and so many, so much diverse terroir and little microclimates and so many different things, we have a lot to offer that just is just getting tapped into. So I think there's going to be a lot of, like you said, what goes up must come down. There's going to be a lot of trends that are seen in the Maryland wine industry, but through that experimentation, I think we're going to find a lot of really fabulous things that just, I think, blow people out of the water and are really just kind of honed to Maryland. Like one of my favorite grapes is, and I talk about it often, Leslie's heard me tout it till the cows come home, but Lemberger from Washington State.
Yeah. So Black Frankish. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm excited when I hear and see people kind of venture into these things that I think have that potential in the right place. But I'm curious. So when did you kind of take over at the helm? When did you really get into this? And what is your, obviously besides being in the day-to-day, which is priceless experience for many years, where did you go and how did you actually decide that this was what you were going to do?
So so basically when I was in high school, I was a senior in high school. I had a guidance counselor that was writing me a college recommendation. And so we were talking about like what I wanted to do as like a career, what I wanted to have as a career. And every single one of my essays in high school were about my grandfather and also about the vineyard. And, that we're able to be associated. And then, she asked me what I wanted to do as a career. And I said, well, I mean, like I would maybe be in business. And then later on, after I retired, like I would be a winemaker and do what my grandfather was doing, my grandparents were doing. And I think that was something that was really interesting to her because she said, well, how old is your grandfather? She asked me that. And he was like 85, 86 or something like that at the time. And so I told her and she goes, well, Rachel, what's going to happen in between? Like what's going to happen? Like, and I said, well, I don't know. It'll just be there. It'll just be there. Like they'll work it. And then when it's time for me to retire, then I'll do that. And she was like, she helped me do the math. Cause I just like, I guess when you're younger, I get a sense of like reality. And it's like your frontal lobe is not fully developed. And that's my like favorite thing to say, but it really wasn't. My sense of reality of like that time frame was really important. And because I had only grown up with seeing every wine festival. I mean, I grew up in this industry and I only saw like men who were 60 plus with mustaches and gray hair. And I thought that in order for me to be a winemaker, I needed to be retired, gray hair, probably not the mustache. I really didn't want to do that part, but like I had to be in that kind of category. And when she said that, it just something like it was like that. It's like a snap, and I just went full on wine. So I have a degree, and one of my degrees is in plant science from Maryland. And then I was able to get work in a berry pathology lab with fruit fungal pathogen interaction with insects. And then I also was able to get an internship and study abroad in France, and then work on an organic vineyard in Loire Valley. And when I graduated, I was planning on working with my grandparents at the vineyard. And I think what happened was, my grandparents had this winery in the vineyard really as a, not a very large business. And there was a lot of things that I had to do in order for me to be full-time with them. So what I did was I actually started working for Siema, for a distribution company, importing company, and I worked as a rep. So I was able to really expand my palate, try a bunch of different wines, sell a bunch of different wines, and really see all aspects of the industry. And intermingled with all of that, when I turned 18, I started working in beer and wine retail stores. So I've really seen all aspects of the industry. And then in November of 2018, I really at that point had decided the only way for me to really have my final goal of being a winemaker was that in order for the business to get to the point where it needed to get to support salaries, was I had to make the plunge. And I had to start working there because it really, like, I was already working there 20, 30 hours a week at the most, just time. I mean, which was like not very much, when you're, so I was able to kind of do both. And, it's really been an interesting situation because even though my mom's generation is very involved in many aspects, like the day-to-day full-time was me and my grandmother and my grandfather. And it's a very large age difference. And I think that they didn't rely on it as a salary. And so that was something that we were starting to do, is we had to create a business that would support salaries.
Right.
And it was a really interesting thing, especially when COVID hit. And as much as that was difficult, it was also very beneficial, where we had to start focusing on the future instead of, like, my whole family, we focus on the past. It's all about the family history. Literally, it's all about history, which is a beautiful history, and it needs to be preserved. And in our perspective, like, we needed to start looking towards the future in order to keep that preservation of history safe. And so it's a very unique juxtaposition between both, and it's really become intertwined over the past couple of years, which I think is really beautiful. So yeah, that's how I got into the industry, basically. So
it's funny because Melissa from Liganor, if you hear her tell her story, it starts off very similar.
Yep.
Where she goes, she wanted to be a winemaker, but she never thought that she could be like the lead winemaker maker, because it was all men around her. So it really speaks volumes about why it's so important to have a diverse population of winemakers, so people can see what their potential can be.
100%. Yeah, it's so funny. Like, Melissa and I we were on the board of the Maryland Winery Association, and we were all going around as a circle of, like, we're all female board, which is really cool. And we were all going around and saying how we got in the industry. And of course, Melissa and I have been technically, like, around the industry, in the industry for quite a long time. And, we echo the same thing. I mean, she thought that she could be a secretary, not a winemaker. And for me, it's like,
right.
I had to have a mustache and be retired. I mean, like, I think that it's something that is really, I think it's a very good point. It's very important to be able to have a big diversity of a demographic of people who are in a career, because then people can see it. Because now people can look at me and think, like, oh, they can be a winemaker, because they can. Right. I mean, it's very difficult unless you have a family to go into it. I mean, like, it's a very hard thing to build your own business of doing it, but people do it. And I think that it's really remarkable. I think it's very remarkable when people do it, because when me growing up with it, the structure's already there.
Right.
So I can't imagine having to, like, really start from scratch. Although in some aspects, like, maybe it's easier, maybe it's harder, but yeah.
You've restructured. I mean, I don't want to say restructured, but you've brought a lot to the table, I think, and bringing things into a different time and place, and kind of, I think, grabbing the reins to direct it and bring it to its potential. Just like I was saying earlier, I think that says a lot. I mean, the grapes can do some amazing things, but they don't do it alone.
Right. It's true. It's true. Thank you. I really appreciate that. I feel like at this point in time, I'm at like 10% of the potential. I have so many goals and so many things I would like to do with the winery. And, like, the main thing for me is making high quality wine and showcasing the family history. Those are the two most important aspects of our business. And I think that it's the two most important aspects of my family's history, is that we have this piece of evidence that my grandfather survived the Holocaust, and that, like, his family had this beautiful legacy of businesses in Poland. And now that we're continuing it here. So it's proof of existence in some aspects. And then the other aspect too is, like, that the wine and the meats have to be good. If they're not good, then, like, the legacy is not being honored. And that's a really big responsibility that I have. And so I think that goes into the fact that I also really like high quality wine. Like, I'm not going to make something I don't like. Like, I really am not going to. Yeah. But I think the other aspect is I have this outside responsibility that doesn't really come from my family. It comes from the fact that I want to have this legacy being honored in a really unique way.
You talked about that a little bit with like with the honey, the mead, and incorporating that into some of the wines and, like, the tirage.
Yeah,
I thought it was very interesting can you explain what that means for anybody who might be listening?
Yeah. So we make, we started a whole sparkling wine series called the Festive Series. And essentially this Festive Series, for the most part, besides my sparkling red, they're all made in champagne method. So basically the way that you make a champagne method sparkling wine is that you have a base wine, and then you have a champagne bottle, and then you basically, it's dosed with yeast, sugar, and nutrients. And so that way that when you put a little beer cap on it or a crown cap, it can ferment within the bottle. It releases carbon dioxide, and it's trapped in the bottle, so it doesn't go out of the bottle. And so that develops pressure, and that's essentially how it's done in some aspects. And what
I'll try it at home.
Huh? Yeah. You have to be careful with the dosage. Yeah.
Sorry, just adding to that. This isn't a try at home recipe.
Yeah. I mean, I was giving a very like it's the cliff notes of the cliff notes of the cliff notes. And yeah, so don't try it at home unless like you really have all the steps done and everything. But basically, so the dosage that goes into that bottle, or into that bulk wine that's already fermented to then go into the bottle is called a tirage. And I worked, when I was working for Siema, it was probably about 2016 or 2017 that there was a winemaker that I was working with, and she was from Oregon, and she was this really, really awesome winemaker. And we were talking about my family's history. We were talking about just a bunch of different things in the industry. And when we were talking about my family's history, we were talking about mead. She said, "Oh, there is this really cool winery that's in Champagne. And what they do is they, instead of using sugar, they tirage with honey. And it's the most beautiful champagne ever." And she couldn't remember the name of it, of course. And I searched for a few years trying to find it. And then I had the opportunity of making my own sparkling myself. And I thought, this is going to be my opportunity. I'm going to try it. I'm going to tirage it with honey instead of sugar. It's very risky to do because honey has a different density. It's all, these things. And I posted about it, and it's actually really funny because there's a couple winemakers that reached out to me and said, "Oh my gosh, have you heard about that one producer in Champagne that's done that before?" None of us can figure out the name of it. None of us. It's an urban legend at this point. I've tried looking it up. I don't think the winery is still, or it's also not. It's not positive. I'm not positive that it ever existed. So, or that they even promoted them. Who knows? No one knows. We've all looked for it. All looked for that winery. Have not been able to figure it out. But I did it, and it worked. And it was a really unique sparkling. It's very unique sparkling that it has like this ability. I think the honey gave it an ability of aging, or tasting aged further than it would have otherwise. And it's really, really cool. That was my first time working with it as a project. And this is this upcoming will be my second time working with it. And I think I can have a handle on it a little bit better, but it's still a really beautiful sparkling, and we're calling it simcha, which in Hebrew means joyous or gladness. And it's, if you think something good has happened, you're like, oh, that's a simcha. The ch is like challah. You don't have to really pronounce like the ch part.
Wow.
But if you can do the ch thing, like, yeah, it's simcha. But yeah, it turned out really nicely, and really excited about it.
We are too.
I know. We're like,
yeah, bubbly is my right. favorite. So that's like an arrow through the heart for me.
Since
it's dry too. It's dry.
Since we did have the Gruner, can you talk about the Gruner and what you like about the Gruner and what people should look out for when they're tasting it?
Yeah, so so Gruner Veltliner is a grape variety, the white grape variety that is native to Austria. And being with my family history being from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Poland, I mean, it made sense to work with it. Plus,
Mhm.
the idea behind it was my mom loves New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, and Sauvignon Blanc does not, on the East Coast, have the ability of tasting like New Zealand. And so therefore I wanted to make sure that there was a wine that I was going to be able to make that she would enjoy. You know, it's all family focused here. I have to keep the family happy. And you know, Gruner Veltliner is a variety that has nice acidity. It has that, and it can vary. But it has a nice acidity. It has that green apple. It has the pea shoot. It has the lemon zest. It has that like zippy kind of character, the white pepper. And that variety from 2021, that I think that's what you've had, really showcased all of that. And that was my mom's favorite. So therefore I had to keep it consistent. And we just released the 2022, and the 2022 is also really, really pretty. It has a little bit more of a plump character. So the front part of the palate has more of that lemon lime, that citrus that you're looking for. It's really not as variety characteristic. Like when I smell it, I mean, I know it's Gruner because I know the wine. I also I've tasted a big, vast variety of Gruner Veltliner. But I think in terms of from Austria, it's slightly different. But it has a really smooth finish like butter, and it's really a really smooth, really easy drinking wine. It's for what I would consider like a crowd pleaser. So those who like the fuller bodied whites, but also like the zippy whites, and don't want Sauvignon Blanc, don't want Pinot Grigio, don't want unoaked Chardonnay, don't want really dry Riesling. I mean, it kind of is like all of it together into one wine.
Zippy is a very good word, because Gruner is, a lot of people think of it and they think the fall, they think Thanksgiving, or they think holidays. And honestly, I think it's one of the greatest like spring, summertime wines. It has a great versatility for food. It's food friendly. You can get so many things out of it. It's like, just people think wine, I have to match the flavors, but it's really just another component and adding another ingredient to, you know, what you're having. Like if you have a heavy sauce, the acid can cut through certain things. If you have something that's on the spicy side, there's a sweetness to Gruner. It has an off dry. It has sometimes a little bit of that, you know, fruit forward essence that really helps with spicy foods or Thai foods. Yeah, I think it's a very versatile wine, and spring and summer is really, I think, key for drinking Gruner.
Yeah, it's a wine that I think like there's not a huge amount of wines that can go from sushi to like schnitzel. Yep. And I think like you have like, so it has something, the ability of being like really fresh versus like really cutting through fried food. And I think that that's a really unique aspect. Like the only variety that can really pair with asparagus technically, which
that's great.
You know, but I think like I think Vino Verde can kind of do that also. But anyway, it's definitely a really versatile wine. And yeah, I mean, one of my family friends is getting married this weekend, and we are sending some Gruner for her wedding. So I think that, you know, it's one of those things that for me, it's like a no-brainer in terms of family gatherings or like just crowds of people.
It's extra special. So stock up for your summertime, folks.
Yes.
You know, I think more people would drink Gruner if they could pronounce it. Because how many times have you been in the tasting room and people just point to it? Like,
yeah, you know,
they're afraid to do it.
So I agree with that to many aspects. I think that it's like the approachability if you're in a store, 100%. Right. I've started realizing that there's so many wineries that have names of things in general that people don't know how to pronounce. And so that's why I had the idea of like, I'm going to put some Hebrew words on some labels, like Kaya and Simcha, and like, and people can't pronounce them really. That's fine. But I think like it's a learning experience. It's funny that you say that though about Gruner, because my aunt was saying we've got to change that name. Like we can't call it that anymore.
You know what? I think that's how people started. Why people started naming their wines.
Yeah,
Wines that you can't pronounce have the wine name and you're like, what grape is that? I don't know. It's just the hobo or the
Yeah.
this or the that. It's they don't know.
I think it's also like we could just put a name on top of it and then put underneath Gruner and then
Right.
yeah. But I don't know. I mean,
Or if they tried that wine and they didn't know, like I love blind tastings for this reason.
Yeah.
You know, oh, I hate Chardonnay, and then they're drinking Chablis, or it's a stainless steel
Bordeaux, and they don't like
Right.
it's
right, or you know, right,
Right,
bank.
right.
It's just like I feel like blind tastings when you're really talking about wine, just fine, you like what you like, and that's good. We're not here to tell you shouldn't or tell you there's something you know you should like. It's not about that. It's about that experience, and everybody has different perceptors and taste buds, so you never know unless you try. And
Right.
so many, you know, preconceived notions are in the world of wine that it's ridiculous, and half of the wines that should be being enjoyed are not just for their namesake.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but then like how much do you want to like wash it?
Right. I mean, that's how people have
Exactly.
different last names than they did originally.
Blind
I just
taste.
want to read this comment from Alicia Smith.
Yeah, she's
One of our
awesome.
favorite Alicia's. And
Yeah.
she said she was at the winery and did a harvest with you, Rachel.
Yeah, she did. She was really
And-
helpful. Really, really helpful. It was last year, actually, I think. I think it was last year.
Alicia, was it last year that you did the harvest with her?
I think it was because that's when she helped with when we brought in a bunch of Pinot Noir and Gruner and lots of stuff. I mean, it was last year because it was raining too. I'm just trying to think about it. Yeah.
She's a trooper. She's
Yeah,
definitely
seriously. I mean, like, they helped for like so many hours. I was like, I felt like always indebted. That was a really, yes, in the rain. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So helpful. That was so amazing.
Can people still volunteer to do harvests with you guys?
Of course, we always love to help. I mean, I will never say no to help. So yeah, it's between August and November, and I have a list of people with emails to be able to like let them know what's coming up. It's not always on the weekend. Sometimes it is. It just depends. Like we're at the
mercy.
Yes, the mercy of the weather, and so yeah, Mother Nature tells us when the fruit gets to get picked, and we don't necessarily have that opportunity of choosing just on a weekend. So that's something that is, I know, difficult, but like, you know, we have to do what we have to do. If it's going to rain or the fruit's ready, then it comes off the vines and has to get processed.
So would they just email you to say, hey, I want to do harvest, or reach out to the wine? Okay.
Yeah, they want to be on our list. And then I send out emails. You know, there are sometimes like there's certain picks that we have that I just don't send out emails. It just depends on how many people I already know I have coming. But yeah, the bulk of it, I mean, we go through about 37 tons of fruit in a year, in a season, and which is not a lot for a large winery, but it's a lot for a very small winery. And it's a really good way of getting your hands dirty. And we send you home with a bottle of wine. So that's always helpful and fun for people too.
Well, I just put it in the chat. So
that's awesome. Thank you.
If you start to get emails.
Yeah, I would love it. I mean, I will never say no to help. So it's a good way for people to have it, to feel like they're a part of our production, and feel like they're a part of our history. Because if your hands are on a cluster, it goes into becoming part of a bottle of wine.
Yes. I always say that's the best way. I hear so many people say, when I retire, I'm gonna open a vineyard. I'm like, do that shit now, so you can see what it's like, because you might want to spend your retirement
drinking
differently.
wine, not necessarily
Right.
enjoying
Yeah,
what you did.
it's so funny because like there is that romance of winemaking,
Mhm.
and it's really not a romantic job at all.
Till the end.
Yeah, like opening a bottle of wine, like enjoying that 100% romantic. The idea of sitting, enjoying a glass of wine, overlooking a vineyard is, of course, romantic.
Yes.
Making wine is not romantic. It is like a love of labor, not a labor of love. I mean, there's a little bit of both, but like definitely more so love of
Mhm.
labor. And I think that's something that I always tell people whenever they tell me that. I said, "Do you like plumbing? And do you like dealing with bugs or insects like that? If you can't do both, then it's just not for you."
Nature, chemistry, labor, repeat.
Yeah. I mean, like my I mean, I planted on Friday 180 vines, like by my hand planted, and did 80 today because I had other things I had to get done too. But yeah, I mean, it's really it's not for the faint of heart. I'm really grateful that I'm young in this industry doing it because I can't imagine. I mean, my grandfather was like 65, 66 when he started the winery.
Oh,
And
wow.
I can't imagine having all the labor that they did and like all the things that they were doing every day after work and like all the things that they did at that age. Because I get home and I'm exhausted and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, like how did they like work a full-time job and then do that? And they just did, but it's not easy. It's tough. So
It'll always be that way, but it does reap rewards that are, I think, far surpass the average in a lot of ways.
yeah, I think it's very rewarding, but I think that like because I'm in the industry, like I have a certain perspective.
Yep.
But I do think that it has a lot of rewards. I think that there is a lot of glory, but there's also a lot of grit to have to get to that point.
You have to be awake to enjoy the glory.
Yeah, and I think honestly, like it's a really unique industry. And I'm really grateful that I'm a part of the industry, and I wouldn't want to be in any other job. I see that Alicia asked if I was able to. Yeah, so that's actually what we're replanting right now. Is so by the end of this week, we will have probably fixed the damaged areas. We had an herbicide drift. I don't want to have to go into that whole long deep thing. It's like it goes into tangents and very long story, but we were able to. We'll probably have about 95% of the vineyard replanted that needed to be replanted from that herbicide drift, and that's from that Blaufränkisch. I think I haven't seen any more new damage, so I decided to take the plunge, and that's why we have Blaufränkisch going into the vineyard.
How long in between was it before you replanted? Just out of curiosity.
So in one block, I waited 2 years because it just got nuked, like from the drift, 2 years in a row, and I had planted it. It got nuked. I planted it again. It got nuked, and I was just like, I can't do that again. So that was the last time we had planted that area. I think was 2021 or 2022, and now so 2-3 years, depending on what area it was. I really wanted to make sure that I was, we weren't going to be wasting the money on planting vines that were not going to be thriving because of the neighboring farmers.
And that helps a lot of the consumers too, and club members and people that purchase from us just understand oftentimes why vintages are skipped, or there's wine that comes out, or somebody has a planting, or it's changed. I mean, there's so many different things that go into it. It's not just, there's grapes growing and somebody says, oh, what kind of grapes can I grow in Maryland? I want to plant some vines and make my own wine in my backyard.
Yeah.
And that's a very common question. And so this just goes to show that there's a lot deep layers that go into it, just like any profession. As much as we would love to have grapes grow on their own and you pick them and drop them into a bucket and they make wine, it doesn't happen that way.
Yeah, it's not an easy it's not a guaranteed industry. with crop every year. So, I mean, there's a couple of varieties that we have on the property that they are producing, and the chemistry wasn't perfect. So what I did is I used it in blending instead of a single varietal. And so and I think that's the nice thing about being a small business. The nice thing about having, making these types of decisions myself, is that there are rules, but there really aren't that many rules. And we ultimately will not produce a bottle of wine that doesn't have correct chemistry, that won't showcase itself correctly. And it will be blended. And if it's blended to the point where it's beyond that 90% in my own moral situation, I will not call it a single varietal, and it will go into a specific set of blends that I typically work with. So it doesn't have to be not the typical set of blends, but typical, like the set of wines that are in the program in terms of the names. And so that I think that's really nice that we have that ability of being flexible, because not every winery has that, and sometimes they just don't work with it at all.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that we're able to really figure out how to keep things incorporated.
Well, it's also nice too, being in Maryland, that you're not confined to restrictions because of your ABA that you're in.
Right.
You can at least for now, set what you want to grow and experiment and see what works well for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's very different than in France and in Italy. And, I think that we have a lot of. I think it's helpful and hurtful in some aspects. I think it is good to have structure. As a person who really likes to have structure, it would be sometimes nice to have decisions made for me, but in many other aspects, we have a lot of freedom. And I think that is something that's really unique about the Maryland industry, because I think that there are sometimes issues with trying to figure out what is the identity of the Maryland wine industry. And I think what really the idea and identity is that you get to go to all these different wineries, and they all have their own business model, their own identity, their own way of operating and making wine. So you aren't getting something that's like you're going to like 10 or 15 different Napa wineries and you just expect Cabernet Sauvignon. It's not
right.
possible.
Exactly.
You're actually getting different businesses and different branding every single time that you go to a different Maryland winery, which I think is really unique, because you get to have more than one favorite instead of just one specific variety. And like, I just would get drowned, honestly, with, if I had to just make Cabernet Sauvignon.
Somebody said, oh, you're like Napa Valley, but Maryland, because you're so small, and Maryland's like the size of Napa Valley. Somebody said, oh, you're like the Napa Valley State. And I said, no, we're like Maryland, better than Napa.
Yeah, we have acid. We get to work with acid. So
way more.
Yeah.
I think that's a very versatile aspect about the industry too. And being in Maryland on the East Coast, there's problems in no matter what climate that you're going to be in, but I really do think that we have the ability of making really food-friendly wines, and they aren't going to be like the bombs. They're not going to be like things that are going to overwhelm your palate. You're going to be able to have a total versatility of start to finish and more than one single variety that you get to have at your dinner table. And I think that that's something really unique. And it's very similar to having a lot of different French wines, I think, in some aspects of the acidity and just the earthiness and all those aspects.
As an industry professional, I say that, preface it, as an industry professional, I don't buy wines that aren't food friendly, because if they're food friendly, the chances are I'm also going to be able to sip them. So if I can't just sip them, and I can't pair them with food in a sense that I have to, every wine has a potential. Wines that age obviously have a date, they have a potential. There's an intention and a purpose and something very beautiful about them. But when I buy wine, I want to be able to drink it usually within a short period of time. I want it to go with something, or I want to be able to sip it on its own. I don't want to have a wine that I can't just sip and pair with something. And
Right.
you are exactly correct in that Maryland has a lot of potential for food friendly sipping wines that you can really enjoy.
Yeah.
Well, we have 5 minutes left,
No
lady.
way.
Yes, it was just, I mean, this has
Time
gone by
flies.
so quickly, so quickly. So, Rachel, can you tell us about anything upcoming or new that you'd like to share with our wine concierge fam?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about sparkling wines. We have that festive series that was just launched on Mother's Day, and it's a sparkling series of red, white, and rosé. Emphasis on the red being really fun. Like people don't see sparkling reds that are dry very often. That's been a really cool project to launch. I'm really thrilled at how the response that we've had. So I think we'll continue having that in our program. And then I think the other thing, so we make these honey wines, we make these meads, and people think of mead, they think of something really sweet. In our family history and the way that we've been making meads, they err on the way drier side. I mean, they drink like table wine. They don't really have any residual sugar. Like they surprise everybody.
Think sherries.
Huh?
Think certain sherries.
No, think Auslese.
Auslese. Okay.
Yeah, but dry, like they're like the sweetest one I have is 0.5% of residual sugar.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Like,
Wow.
well, 1.25%, but like the ones I've been making currently, they're about 0.5%.
Okay.
What is the alcohol range?
12.5 to 13.1.
Nice.
Yeah, so they're really also very food friendly. They have acid because I make the meads with grapes. I also make them just traditional Polish style meads, and like my family did in the 1800s. And I think that there's something really unique about them. They're very spiritual in many ways, and I have them all named after family members. So my grandfather was a Holocaust survivor, and all of the other honey wines or the meads are really named after his family that did or did not survive the Holocaust. I mean, he was really one of 3 that actually survived from Europe out of over 80 plus people. He was the only person to survive in his immediate family. So in June, I'm hoping to get all this stuff bottled in the next 2 weeks. So I'm actually going to be able to launch a whole family's worth of meads.
Oh,
amazing.
So it's really, I mean, because we don't have any heirlooms, like my grandfather, like he had nothing after he survived. So we don't have any heirlooms. We don't have any pictures really. Like we have a couple pictures from like family members that have nothing, like not my grandfather's on any of them. His immediate family's not in any of them. But the really unique thing that that we've been doing with these honey wines is that they're named after people. They're all very different. And on the back of the back label, there's a QR code, and that QR code links to that person's story. So this is our effort and our way of keeping that.
Oh,
and so
that's
people get to learn about like who that person was. It's obviously not a very positive like ending story of the fact that like they didn't survive, but we get to really showcase who they were and the essence of who they were from the stories of my grandfather, because that's the only way we know about them.
The connection is the most important thing.
Yeah, and it's honestly like, for example, I have this mead called Mellow. It's named after my grandfather's, the middle brother, Eli Melech Loew, whose nickname was Mellow. And Mellow was this like suave, like he was a trumbenik, which in Yiddish we would say is like a troublemaker. He was very resourceful. I mean, he had an agenda, and he did not survive. And I made this mead with my brother. We have Gruner Veltliner that we decided to make it with. I mean, it all ferments together. Okay. So it's not like it's a Gruner that's blended with a mead. It's literally like the Gruner juice is then like blended with a honey water solution, which is done in a very specific manner. It's a very secret recipe that we have. It's a very old method that I was able to kind of make sure that it was actually the old method, because like I did some massive research and rabbit hole research. Anyway, so my brother helped me make that one. He wanted to name it after Mellow. And it was really, these situations are really remarkable because I have family members that will come and help, and they get to decide what name who they want to name it after. And then once they do, like, it's all up to the mead of how it ferments. I have no idea exactly how it's going to turn out. That mead, Mellow, is so suave. And it is so unique as to how that personality is shown just so beautifully. And so I actually have one after his mother, Clara, who, like, it's exactly how I would have envisioned her. Like, I can envision what she looked like, even though I've never seen a picture of her. And that mead is exactly how I thought she would have looked like.
Okay.
I mean, it's like, it has this floral note. It's elegant. It has like a little bit of a tropical note. I mean, and she was just she was a woman who had very high standards for herself and for her kids and for her family. I mean, she had a very specific way of doing things. So I have one for my grandfather after the nickname he had in Europe. I have one for my grandfather's oldest brother. I mean, like, I have 7 or 8 of them that were going to be released by June.
Wow.
And it's a whole family's worth. And I think that is the way of my family having heirlooms. That's one of the most, I think, exciting projects that we've had. They're tributes, and they keep memory alive in a really beautiful way. And we get to share that with customers, and customers get to learn, and they get to enjoy something. So it's kind of a juxtaposition of something that's obviously very sad with something that's really, really delicious and beautiful. And they get to honor the person's memory just by enjoying it.
I'd say the spirits had a hand in that.
Yeah, I think so. Honestly,
I think so.
I have a whole story about one of them, and I won't go into that story today because, but yeah, there's one of them that it's definitely made her presence known. So not Clara, but another one.
Very nice. I love that. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So please tell people where they can find you on social media, where they can find the vineyard and come and visit and purchase.
Yeah. So we have social media. We're on Facebook, on Instagram. We have a website, Loew Vineyards for the Facebook, Loew Vineyards Wine for the Instagram. Our website is loewvineyards.net. And our tasting room is in Mount Airy, Maryland. So we're 14001 Liberty Road in Mount Airy, Maryland. A lot of times people like to make a whole day trip because where we're located, there's 5 of us, 5 wineries in a 5-mile radius. And so 3 of the 4 oldest wineries in the state of Maryland are in our 5-mile radius, which is really nice. And we're also in a bunch of stores. I'm sure you can get our wines from the Wine Concierge. We also have online purchasing as well, and in our tasting room and various restaurants. And they're all listed on our website, restaurants and stores throughout the state. And
do you ship, Rachel?
We do. I'm right now in a little bit of a situation with UPS, so trying to figure that out. But yes,
you and everybody else.
Yeah,
that is a never-ending tale. Everybody we talk
really threw me for a loop this week or last week to this week, and I mean, yeah.
If you don't want to hear anything nice about UPS, come sit next to me.
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Yeah. Well, I needed that glass of wine today after. So, yeah, I'm sure we could totally.
Yeah, that's a whole segment.
Yeah, we won't do that publicly today. But,
nope.
Privately, 100%.
That's not for live.
So much.
Yeah.
And we will see you guys soon. And our June Wine Club is coming out next month. I can't believe it's a couple of weeks away. So stay posted. And if you've never joined the Wine Club before, go to thewineconcierge.co, and we're happy to share information with you. Have a great evening, and thank you again, Rachel. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you
so
much.
So glad I got to do it.
It was a pleasure. It was so wonderful talking with you. Thanks for sharing.
Of course. Thank you.